All right, three, two, one. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Douglas Thompson. He's from the UK, and we're going to talk about a book that he wrote back in 2013, a book that came to my attention after doing another earlier interview about the Profumo affair, or what's known as the Profumo affair in the UK. Title of his book is Stephen Ward Scapegoat. The subtitle is They All Loved Him, but when it went wrong, they killed him. And Mr. Thompson's also a prolific writer. He has a number of other books. He just published a book this year titled The Spitfire Girl, An Extraordinary Tale of Courage in World War II. Also, another title is The Hustlers, Gambling, Greed, and the Perfect Con, published 2012. Secrets and Lies, The Trials of Christine Keeler from 2014, which overlaps with the subject matter of this book. And then another is No Handcuffs, The Final Word on My War with the Craze, The Friends of Eddie Richardson, which was last year, 2019. So again, this book is about Stephen Ward that ties into the Profumo affair. And if anybody has any questions who's listening out there, please just reserve them for, half an hour, 45 minutes before we kind of get through the preliminaries of the book. But Mr. Thompson, thank you for joining us. If you can tell people who may not be familiar with your background, can you talk about yourself and what led you to write this book?
Well, strangely enough, it began in America. I was a correspondent in Los Angeles for 20 years, and did a lot, because of the time I was there, I did a lot of Hollywood interviews, and I did a few Hollywood books. And I was contacted by someone who knew Christine Keeler, who was the central role, the femme fatale, the whole catalyst for the whole Profumo affair, because she was the one who had the affair with John Profumo, who was the Minister of War, and with Eugenie Ivanov, who was a KGB GRU spy from Moscow. But linking them was Stephen Ward, who was the most, on investigation, turned out to be the most, if not the headline person, the most intriguing of all the participants in the whole Profumo affair, which brought down a British government, changed the way society looked to morality in the UK in the 60s, and the world here in the UK really never was the same after the Profumo affair. But I became interested. I kind of grew up as a kid, in a way, listening to the newspaper reports and knowing about it, but only vaguely, but was intrigued. And I was given the chance to meet Christine and talk about writing her book, which was a long time ago, but this was late 90s, I suppose, and which eventually I agreed to do, and we did. And then we updated it after Profumo died. And again, recently, Christine died in 2017, and the book was reissued then with a foreword by her son, who is now petitioning to get a pardon for her for a perjury charge. He went to jail for 9 months for committing perjury during the trial of one of the participants in the Profumo affair. She was rather, what's the word? I'm going to say manhandled, but she was kind of bulldogged into to lying in court by the police, who said it wasn't a problem and it would help them get a violent criminal off the streets of London. So it was a way round, a long way around, really, eventually coming back to Stephen Ward and doing the book, because really I was still fascinated trying to find out more about him. And the more you went into it, the more Christine was only one of several women who he tried to, very much like My Fair Lady, Pygmalion. He was the doctor. He was a doctor, an osteopath, and he tried to create stars out of these young girls who he met. Mainly, he would sit in coffee shops in Park Lane in London. And you have to remember, this is a London where there's very little traffic, where you can get across the city in 20 minutes. very lazy, not so much cultured, but very easygoing, very 9 to 5. People had lunch, afternoon tea. The pace of life was very slow during the day. What they got up to in the evenings was, it was almost like out of some X-rated movie when you went into it. So it all kind of hotted up at night. But Ward would sketch. He was a fabulous artist, and he would sketch these girls, and not really. It was very platonic, most of the arrangement he had with them. It wasn't kind of sexual, and they became. He just seemed to enjoy having them on his arm, to to control them, to have this control over them. There was a girl called Vicky Ward, who he charmed and then groomed and brought out in society, previous to Christine. And he attempted to do that with an actress called Shirley Ann Field, who at that time was a very big international star, starring with Steve McQueen and Robert Wagner in a movie, Albert Finney. I think she had 3 big movies at the time of the Perfumo affair, all running at the same time. So, and he plied her with Coca-Cola stockings and the promise of, I think it was the promise she could rather have beans on toast or stockings. I think that's what she said. But the thing with Ward was that he was a snob. He wanted to be part of aristocracy. He wanted part of society. And because he was an osteopath, and a very good one and very well renowned, he treated some very famous people, including Winston Churchill, Prince Philip he sketched, Princess Margaret he sketched.
Averell Harriman from the U.S.
Yep, in the U.S. The U.S. ambassador. There was a very big. David Bruce, I think, was the ambassador. Was still, I think, at the U.S. embassy in London. Very, very friendly with lots of very prominent American residents in the UK, but also at the same time very friendly with some of the Russian contingents, and very taken with the problems and the impact of the atom bomb and what it could rot on the world. So he became I suppose his sympathies were kind of saving the world, but because of the connections he had, it leaked into security, war offices, and a very, very messy outcome later on. But that all began at the estate of Lord Astor, who was he was again a patient of Ward's, and Bill Astor was Lady Astor, the American, the first female MP in the UK, which became a member of Parliament long before, not long before, but not long after women got the vote. So she was the Cliveden set was a very influential set of people. And Stephen Ward, through Bill Astor, Lady Astor's son, who inherited everything, had a cottage on the grounds, and he used to go there every free time he had, but mainly at weekends. In these days, it would have been about a half-hour, 40-minute drive from his consulting rooms in Wimpole Street in central London out to the countryside. And he took friends with him, including the girls he met, who he introduced to people like Bill Astor. And Bill Astor was someone who liked to, shall we say, frolic with the young girls. There was sort of romantic intrigues there. And at the same time, often these parties, Stephen Ward parties, would be going on with the young girls, but at the same time, there would be a very prominent visitors to the UK being entertained, presidents of Pakistan or ambassadors, envoys from here, there, everywhere, at the dinner table of Bill Astor. And it was on one of these occasions in July 1961. And this is where the perfume affair does get a little bit confusing because of the time frame, because the actuality of the affair and the public and the kind of public knowledge of it, there is a 2-year time gap. So in 61, John Profumo, the Minister of War, and his wife, and many other prominent people are having dinner with Bill Astor. At the same time, it's a really hot, rare, very hot summer's day in England, and Christine Keeler is in the swimming pool naked. Stephen Ward is sitting there laughing, joking, whatever, by the side of the pool, when Profumo, with Bill Astor and their wives, walk through the grounds, hear the laughing, and investigate to see who it is. And that's the first time John Profumo encounters Christine, and she's introduced, hurriedly putting a towel around herself, by Stephen Ward to John Profumo. The next day, Eugene Ivanov, who works out of the Russian embassy in London, is invited by Stephen Ward to visit him at Cliveden. So on that Saturday, you've got the Minister of War of the UK, a KGB GRU agent of the Russians, Stephen Ward and assorted other people, basically having a sunbathing, swimming by the pool. And that's really where the connection takes place between Christine and Ivanov and Profumo and Christine. So the triangle is there then. And that evening, Christine has sex with Ivanov, and within 6 days, she's contacted by Profumo, who is trying to make advances and make a date with her, and eventually, a few days later, their affair begins. So what you've got in secret at that point in 61 is that triangle linking security concerns, and obviously a lot of flagrant disregard for state secrets,
Right.
because the John Profumo is squiring Christine around and taking her at times to his home and to his office, where there are all the red boxes packed full of military secrets. And the background to it at the time is America and Harold Macmillan, the Prime Minister, are in very, very tense talks about American getting missile sites in Europe to combat, because the Cold War is very, very cold at that point. So you've got all this background to it, and at the same time, this kind of rather frivolous affair is going on, but behind it, there's this rather dark thread running.
Right, but wasn't kind of his entree into the higher echelons of UK society was because he would have these women around. He would have women on his arm. He was pretty much a committed bachelor after having kind of a disappointing love affair. But that was kind of his side into that huge. I mean, I think one of the things that you detail in a fantastic way in the book is that club scene that was taking place in post-war UK or London, where these guys were in all kinds of different clubs and moving around. And it seemed like these young girls that were in these clubs were kind of part of a currency almost.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good word, currency, because I think that it's exactly that. It's a bit like in the, before drugs and tobacco was the currency in prisons. I think the girls were the currency to the parties. If you turned up with a group of girls, you got in the door, as it were. But I think with Ward, it was more subtle than that, because they were gorgeous, beautiful girls, and he kind of, as I say, groomed them in a, we've had the Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell, the Epstein, the girls being groomed for Epstein, being groomed for other people, running, and that story and scandal has been running, for some many months now at the moment. But it's very similar in a way the Profumo thing, because Ward was that kind of Epstein figure. He was the one with the girls. So if you were having a party or you were having a weekend, it was good to be around. But the way Ward had it, the girls were around his cottage on the estate. So it was very easy for the aristocracy to move around the estate and just wander over, and suddenly they're being entertained by young girls rather than sitting in some lazy kind of snoozing in some library in the big house. So that was it. I mean, and I think Ward, that currency, these girls as currency, was his way to befriend and to be protected and to be elevated by people whom he thought, and I'd argue very wrongly, who he thought were his betters because they were born to titled families, or they were members of the House of Lords, or they were related to royalty. As I said, he Ward came from a seaside town in England, went to a kind of very minor public school, and resented that he didn't have a classical upper class education. So he had a chip on his shoulder in that sense, and I think because of that, he wanted to get on. He was willing to use the women. I don't think he despised the girls or
Still there? I think I lost you. Doug? I don't know. Let's see what happened. Okay, you're back. I missed you. Kind of blocked out for about 30 seconds there. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
No, I was talking about Murray's club and how the clubs where the Christine and had worked with Mandy Rice Davis, and if you look at it with our kind of binocular hindsight today, and think about it, Mandy Rice Davis was 15 years old when she was in that club, and I think Christine was 17. Not even 18 at that point. So you've got young girls parading around pretty much naked in front of, leery, what they would regard as very old men, probably men in their 40s, and men in position, in high positions in London society, going there. And that's where the connections were made.
And he was from what, Torquay? Is that right? I don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah.
And he was a vicar's son, so he was from his dad was a Christian minister, I think, down there outside. Yep. So he was definitely much more rural than some of these sophisticated aristocratic types. And I mean, Profumo, he had known Profumo before the 60s. So they had been in those circles during post-war 50s. And Profumo himself they were thinking that he could possibly become prime minister in the future. He was.
I think he had. He was certainly within the Conservative Party, who were in power. He was certainly the coming guy. He was going to be the one that was going to take over from Macmillan, because Macmillan was getting on a bit. He was older, but he was also off that grandee, old-fashioned hunting, shooting, fishing, the grouse moor flavor, which of course at that point is going out of fashion. The 60s are coming in, and the prime minister looks as though he's still sort of running Downton Abbey. So it's that kind of. So Profumo is this very smooth, very slick, very confident, apparently capable man. So he very much was in the running, and I think that was part of the horror of it all for them, for the Conservative, the Tory party, and the downfall of them was that they just couldn't believe someone with such a glittering prospects could throw it all away in such a kind of, in a rather seedy fashion, really. But Profumo had got previous in that he had his stag party in a club called the Eve Club in 1953, and the Eve Club was run by a couple who'd worked at Murray's Club, which was the kind of prominent one. But the Eve Club was described by someone as a sort of kind of part of the canteen for the Foreign Office, because basically you could be sitting there with Judy Garland one night, and opposite her would be Boris from Moscow, the spy, someone from MI5 and MI6, because the club was just around the corner from where our MI6 headquarters were. So there was all this spy
intrigue, right? Spy versus spy intrigue, yeah.
Yeah, all going on. And someone like Profumo obviously knew about it and is walking into it as a young MP. So he had that kind of rakish, indiscreet, wild, and I think probably driven, or that whole attitude of his is driven by arrogance of his position, that he felt that he should become the leader of the UK, be a world figure, become a world figure, and in a sense, Stephen Ward, realizing that and anticipating that himself, is buying into it and hooking his star to Profumo's star as well.
Interesting. And well, Ward himself also, he was kind of you can see in the picture here, if you're watching on YouTube, he had this kind of breezy charm, very charming guy, very affable, and really inserted himself into that world as somebody who didn't really have a family or anything. This was kind of his outlet, right? These clubs and the women.
Oh yeah, and I mean but interestingly, there's another club called the Ambassadeurs, which was very, very popular, and there was a nightclub within that club called the Milroy, and everybody from gangsters to aristocrats to government ministers to Princess Margaret. When Princess Margaret went there, the Paul Adams, who was the band leader, would play up a song for her, and she said Paul Adams was her favorite band leader, and it was a big society thing. But someone said to me that Stephen Ward would be there, and you'd see him there and be in a crowd of people, and then he wouldn't be there. But you didn't miss him when he wasn't there, and he didn't make a noise when he was. He was this kind of almost ghostly figure who haunted a lot of that society, almost like a Mr. Fix. He was there when people wanted something. He was there as a provider, and that something usually was young girls who he had this great ability to attract. But he always wanted his proteges. Shirley Ann Field told me that she was dating an actor, and who was pretty much falling in love with this actor, wanted it, and Ward, who had was friendly with her, said, "Oh no, you must meet the Duke of so and so." He wanted to marry her off, and so she would become the Duchess of something, because he thought this was the epitome of achievement. With more, a woman couldn't do any better than become a duchess or a princess. The fact that she didn't want to do that didn't matter, and so it was a kind of he lived a kind of fantasy life, or he lived it out. I mean, it wasn't fantasy. He made reality of how he wanted things to be, and then of course it all comes crashing down,
right?
Because people are they don't always play the story the way you've written it.
But he had other women before Keeler, so there was a string of women that led up to Keeler. Keeler ends up in Cliveden at the cottage. Mm-hmm. Profumo, Astor. Then what happens next after 61?
The affair with John Profumo goes on for a year or so. Christine is involved in all kinds of skullduggery and various things, but at the same time, Stephen Ward makes it known that to the security services that there is a link between Ivanov and Profumo. The security services then begin investigating everybody, including Stephen Ward, and to see basically, is this a nest of spies? Are they Russian spies? Are they passing information on? Is it going to the Americans? At that point, the CIA, Jesus Angleton in Washington, is going to bits and pieces because we've had the scandal of Guy Burgess and McLean, who've run off to Moscow, having given
Cambridge
all the
5, right? Yeah, Cambridge 5.
Cambridge 5, and also the fact that the CIA man had been great friends with Kim Philby, who has also vanished. So you've got a whole spy scandal. Then you've got the Profumo Minister of War and Russians. So it's all of that is happening as Christine's affair with Profumo is going on. Of course, the reality of it is that she has only had this one night stand with Ivanov, but Ivanov is very much still around. And it does get very complicated because Ivanov is also the conduit for a spy ring, which is involved in getting submarine secrets to Moscow as well. So you've got all of that mess happening. You've got the kind of Scotland Yard policemen who, in this case, pretty much are the ones that you see in the movies. They've all got soft hats and mustaches and really don't know what they're doing. It's very it's being fed. They're in all different directions, and of course it's very political. So the Home Secretary is getting onto Scotland Yard. He's getting onto MI5. He's getting onto the British Special Branch, who all then come very heavy-footed into the affair, and they decide there has to be a fall guy for all this mess, all the supposed secrets, because by then the newspapers in 61 or 62 are all sniffing around it. There's a blind item appears in a society magazine, which tips people in the know off to the fact that Profumo's been having the affair with Christine. The Labour Party opposition bring the matter up in the House of Commons, which then makes it a matter of privilege so it can be reported in the newspapers without fear of libel actions. So Profumo, at that point, then goes public and denies that he's having an affair with Christine Keeler. And he goes public in the House of Commons, makes a member's statement, which is an official statement, and lies to the House of Commons. Now, you could cut off the head of everybody in the Tower of London, run down Oxford Street, run around Fifth Avenue, down Rodeo Drive, murder everybody, do whatever, any crime you can think of. But lying to the House of Commons in those days was the worst thing in the world that anybody could do. And it comes out in a matter of not too long, matter of weeks, months, that he did lie. And that's when the whole story explodes, which is the 2-year gap between the 61 and the beginning of the affair in the summer of 63, when the whole story blows up, and Profumo resigns, and the spy chasing really gets very heated up, and Stephen Ward, the focus really comes onto Stephen Ward at that point.
I think you wrote in, just a second, but you wrote in your book, like every Russian person there was working for the KGB. Anybody, including Ivanov, anybody sent to London was definitely some kind of spook or spy. So it was definitely a haughty spy versus spy environment.
Yeah, I mean, it was, at that time, the FBI had offices in London, and that was the only time they ever had offices outside of the US, I think. Was at that time. It was because there was so much going on, and back and forth, and because of Christine had visited, and Mandy Rice Davis visited New York during this period between that 2 years. So and there was all kinds of gossip about her and Robert Kennedy, John Kennedy, all of that involvement, and at sex parties at the UN building. So the traffic, the kind of telegram traffic between the FBI, the CIA, MI6, MI5. When you look in all, it's astonishing. An awful lot of it's redacted, but it's all urgent, director's eyes only, all of this stuff. So they were pretty much freaking in Washington and in London, and I probably freaking in Moscow as well. But of course, as I said, the big problem was because of all this finding somewhere to put the missiles in Europe. And at the time, you've got to remember, everybody's wandering around wondering whether this bomb is going to drop on them, and everybody's going to die the next morning. So it's a time when Kennedy's telling people that not to go on holiday, but to dig an air raid shelter in your backyard in America, and much the same here. So it's very tense.
I mean, Ward himself was kind of during the Cuban Missile Crisis, he was kind of a back alley or back channel conduit, right?
Yeah, he tried. I mean, Ward, because of how he saw himself in society, thought he could work with the security services and approached them, and went through Lord Arran, who was a very well thought of government minister, and through him, he tried to basically. He was trying to stop the deployment of missiles, not so much the deployment, but the positioning of missiles in Europe, because he was very fearful of the bomb. So he got involved in the dealings, much to the distress of the security services, with the high politics of it all. So I think his position, and at that point. Ivanov, the spy, I think, convinced Ward that he should try and push for this, and I think was working on behalf of Khrushchev's interests. He was being fed by Ivanov a dialogue that he should take to the UK masters that be, that was pretty much edited down from Moscow. So there was a lot of suspicion about Ward, about his motives, by the security people here. But I think in all, when you look at it, I think he was doing it rather naively in what he thought was the best interests of humankind, but at the same time being used as a pawn at the time would have been very much the biggest enemy going.
He kind of had this idea, I mean, you write about it in the book, that he was kind of above the law due to his connections, that he would never be arrested, right? So he would never okay. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I mean, he had an exhibition of his drawings, which Prince. I mean, I think about the only royal he didn't draw was the Queen herself, but all the other members of the royal family, he'd done portraits, but his name kind of fell so much in currency that when the exhibition was on, someone secretly came in and bought all the drawings and took them all away, all the originals. That somebody was Anthony Blunt, who was the keeper of the Queen's pictures. So he was a very big art historian expert, very close to the Queen, royal family. And of course, he turns out eventually to be a member of the Cambridge spy ring, one of the more prominent spies of all time, as far as we were concerned. So Ward is dealing with people who are so duplicitous that his naivety really comes through here, because he believes basically everybody will support him. All the friends he's made, all the connections through the clubs, all the girls he's supplied to Bill Astor and all the other members of the Thursday Club, who included, prominent entertainers, prominent politicians, members of society. But one by one, they all just walked away from him. Bill Astor took back the key, very apologetically, took back the keys for the cottage at Cliveden, and he was kind of hung out to dry by society. And then at that point, the police, at the instruction of the Home Office, put the heavy arm on Christian Keeler, and on Mandy Rice Davis. They pulled Mandy Rice Davis into a little cell and gave her the third degree, and her crime at that point was that she'd missed paying a rental payment on her television set, which doesn't sound too criminal. But they took statements from her, which implied that she had been sleeping with people for money in Stephen Ward's flat. Indeed, and in fact, indeed, Mandy had. I mean, Mandy unashamedly was taking cash off people, and made no bones about it. And similarly, they brought Christine in and kind of tarred her with that same thing. And she, again, it was very much set up, but they were set up by the police. So they were brought into court to give evidence when charges were brought against Stephen Ward after living off immoral earnings, basically that he was a pimp. So here is a man who hobnobs with the gentry, the sophisticates, the aristocracy, but thinks they're all his friends and he's a member of it. And he's suddenly hauled into the Old Bailey, the great criminal court in the world, for all to see, and charged with living off immoral earnings and being a very unpleasant, seedy character.
But he didn't really have that kind. I mean, according to what I read in your book, he didn't really have an overwhelming amount of money for somebody who was supposedly involved in criminality. It seems like he kind of just lived.
Well, that's the whole point. The thing is that these girls were living with them. They gave Stephen Ward more money than he ever gave them, because they'd pay for the electricity, they'd pay bills and so on. So it was they were the ones he was kind of supporting them, and they would pay back, kick in towards the bill for this or that. There certainly wasn't any, lavish amounts of money that he was making out, or he wasn't making money out of the girls. There's no question of it. But it was a charge that they could certainly parade. And what they did was, because Stephen Ward had involved himself with all these other women and set them up, and many of them were prostitutes, and there had been situations where he'd introduced them to other people purely on a convenience, as a favor, not for any profit. But of course, they were able again to put the heavy arm on some of these girls who came to court to say that he was there, that they had sex for money at his behest. But of course, they were doing that because the police had said that they would charge them and put them in jail. And some of the women had young children, single mothers. They didn't want that, so they gave evidence. And the way it works here, or what then in the court system, there is a preliminary hearing where that evidence is given, and that evidence is not given in camera. So it's like a grand jury in America, but all the evidence is made public. So all of that was made public before the big trial itself. So Ward's reputation is trashed, ruined before the big event. And I think at that point, Christine never really got over having been part of having to give evidence, which turned out to be evidence against Stephen Ward, who she got upset with at times, but always kind of looked up to. I think it was only much in later life that she reappraised what role he had played. But so Ward was set up at this Old Bailey court, and if you look through it, and interestingly, the transcript of that court proceeding has been locked away, the official transcript, and is not available till 2046.
Wow.
And if you go to the archive, as I've done, as many people have done, and you try and find out files pertaining to the Profumo affair, but mainly pertaining to Stephen Ward and the Ward case and Ward's involvement, the involvement of MI5, the FBI, CIA, and everyone else, I think they added it was locked away for another 100 years in 1974. So unfortunately, I don't think you or I will be around possibly when the real dirt comes out. So it's astonishing.
But
You think
Ward himself had to have so much material, dirt, or whatever you call it, compromat or whatever, on
yeah,
all of the elites there. So they were probably very nervous people when he got arrested.
there was all of that. There was a lot of burglaries. There was a lot of subsequently Ivanov, who suddenly vanished from here and went back to Moscow. He died suspiciously, but apparently the rumor had it. I mean, I went to Moscow to try and find it, and supposedly somewhere in Moscow or in Russia is this compromat, this compromising photographs of famous people, famous people in history now, in compromising situations, and documents going way, way back, and that is either has been destroyed, or it's in a file of a friend of mine in Moscow took me to there's a building in the center, which is the new kind of filing system for the Kremlin, and it's supposedly somewhere in that building on the 29th floor there is all these documents. But
All those documents. But there's a couple parts in your book where people had double-sided mirrors. There were listening booths at the back of some of these clubs. So who was compiling that information? I don't know, but it seems like there was definitely people trying to keep tabs on.
I think there's a lot of, I mean, whether it was all spooks and spies doing it, whether you had often it was purely from kind of entertainment value, the see-through minute, the kind of orgy type things that happened. A lot of that. Strangely enough, there's never been any hint of filming. It all seems to talk of still pictures, which is strange. You would have thought, that there would have been some sort of filming or film of the events, and that doesn't seem to have. Well, if it did, the film has certainly disappeared. But both Stephen Ward's consulting rooms in Wimpole Mews and his and the cottage when he was still there were both burglarized a couple of times, and there were photographs and things taken away. Christine certainly, she lost photographs and letters, mainly letters between her and Profumo. That Profumo had written notes to her. Only one was left, and several others were all stolen, vanished,
Gotcha.
burned.
Do you think when Blunt bought Ward's artistic repository, do you think that was a part of a cover-up? That was the intent, is to keep all the stuff he was taking pictures of? Because he was always sketching people, the girls and famous people.
Yeah. And I mean, there's pictures. I mean, I've got a couple of sketches here that, he did Christine, Mandy Rice Davis. There's an old rogue called Dandy Kim. Very nice man, but a real rogue. And he had a lot of the pictures and trying to sell them. So these things, they still have that value. But I think that Blunt's, whether he acted for the royal family knowingly, but for them to take away the pictures, at the exhibition, the drawings of the royal family, or whether he thought that would bring him kudos with the royal family, we don't know. In the Crown television series, which I can't remember now whether it's series 2 or series 3, the Profumo affair is pretty much mentioned in it, and they make it up as they go along, and they have Blunt and Prince Philip talking to each other, because the inference was that Philip, because he knew Ward, because he knew a lot of the people involved, that there was some conspiracy involving him. So it goes on. I mean, and of course the story takes on its own legend, its own myth over the years, because like the Crown interpret it one way, and for a new generation, what they see on television becomes the reality, is what they say. But I think the reality of it is that a lot of very prominent people in British society and also with a big American influx, American links. I mean, Douglas Fairbanks Jr., the actor, um, certainly involved in trying to hush it up. He was certainly involved in sexual shenanigans with Christine and Mandy Rice Davis at the same time with them. There was a menage with them. He was linked into Lord Mountbatten. He was very friendly with Mountbatten. Mountbatten, again, is very prominent in the Crown, but that's a lot of that again is fantasy because there was much scandal involving them. So it goes on at great length, and at the centre of it all is Stephen Ward, who meets Mountbatten on many occasions, and goes to and Mountbatten visits their house in a place Kinnerton Mews, just off Kinnerton Mews. There was a guy called Barn, who was a photographer, and he was very friendly with Mountbatten, who was Prince Philip's kind of father figure, and Barn took the photographs, not at the royal wedding, but at the engagement of the Queen to Prince Philip. So it's all kind of interconnected. And then Barron supposedly took photographs, some of the photographs which may well be in Moscow today. So they're all, not everything was recorded in one way or another.
So was the publication of this book, which you published in 2013, did that lead you to the meeting with Christine Keeler and writing that book with her? Is that correct?
No, it was the other way around.
Oh, okay.
Enough. It was Christine. I'd worked with for a long time with Christine, and then we really finished her story, and I just felt that the Ward story, there's two. You couldn't get all of that into Christine's story because it was all from her perspective, because it was her telling her story, as it were. So to get into it just didn't work. So all of that material, and then of course because I worked with Christine and had her blessing, as it were, lots of people from that era were willing to speak to me who wouldn't have talked to me otherwise.
And that's in the Ward book. You reference many people that you talked to in 2013 who've been there in the 60s. Can you talk a little bit about Keeler and what she was like and what happened to her after this whole affair?
Well, I think the Christine was quite tragic. What happened really, because she was one of the original, I suppose, a Me Too victim, in the sense that she was very much used and abused by the men around her. She was a good time girl, but not in a kind of prostitution sense. She was somebody who she liked to have sex, would be fair. I think she went to bed with a lot of people. She liked to have a good time. Came to London as a teenager, worked at Murray's Club, meets Stephen Ward, moves on into that society. But after the scandal, she is still a very attractive. She tries to get into modeling. She's kind of kicked back at every move she makes to further herself as a person. Mainly because she's, I think, really quite broken, traumatized, or we call it post-traumatic stress. After the trial, she is charged with perjury. She goes to jail for 9 months because of perjury. That perjury charge and the conviction, her son Seymour is at this moment trying to have that overturned. And a barrister here has written a very full argument for it to happen, and I think that's probably going to be going forward in the next few weeks, months, and there's a good chance of succeeding. The Christine's life, and I think she had 2 marriages, had 2 sons. She was a very determined, very focused person. So it's very hard to convince Christine of of compromising in any way, of taking an easy way out. She would always insist that what she said was the truth. This is what happened. So she wouldn't give herself an easy life or an easy time by compromising, saying, "Oh well, maybe I made a mistake." She was very, very true to what she believed was what happened, was the actuality, and that didn't do her any favors. She had a very difficult life for many years because she was seen as this, I suppose, in the 70s and even into the 80s, as this scarlet woman. She became a kind of a shorthand for a moment in history. And if you look at many books about the 60s, you'll see on the front cover it will be the moon landing, picture of JFK, and usually there'll be a picture of Christine on the chair sitting in that famous picture. And if in that picture she insists that she had her knickers on when the photograph was taken, the photographer insisted that she didn't. She was still arguing about that up to the, not many weeks before she died. She was still insisting. It's because it was a point of principle on her point that she had her underwear on when she had that photograph taken. So you could go to her when we were doing the book. You'd be sitting there and you'd say, "Well, Christine, this date doesn't make sense. It doesn't figure in. It can't have been that time." Yes, it was. Yes, it was. You have to go back. And I ended up walking around streets in London looking at addresses which she swore was that. It just didn't make sense. And you walked around, and sure enough, it would be that place did exist, and that was the number of the street. She had a phenomenal memory for the locations and where things happened, and she was dogmatic. But in later life, she came round. She became more pliable. And I think what happened was her son married, and she had a granddaughter who she doted on, and I think that brought life around for her in full circle.
Didn't you say at the beginning of the interview that there was a purchase of her story, or the story of Profumo Affair, that was going to be produced? Is that correct?
Her story was a BBC did a beginning of this year, 2019, a 6-part drama of Christine's story, the trials of Christine Keeler, and as I understand it, it's being bought and going to be seen in America very shortly, I would think.
Oh, interesting. I'll keep an eye out for that. Great. Do you have a minute to take a few questions from the audience?
Sure, of course.
We're at about 52 minutes. Somebody asked, I think earlier, how close, if you can see on the screen, how close was Ward to the monarchy is a question.
To the monarch?
How close was Ward to the monarchy, I guess?
Well, he sat with Prince Philip, the Queen's husband, and sketched him, met him on many occasions. They were both members of a club called the Thursday Club, which met in Wheeler's restaurant every Thursday. That's the name. So he drew Princess Margaret. He knew Lord Snowdon, Margaret's husband. So he certainly mixed in that circle. Yes, very much so. And of course, through being an osteopath and society osteopath, it's like Averell Harriman, the American ambassador, people like that. He was very renowned. One of the guys I met, he really was. He was very much a playboy, a very, very tall man, and he'd had problems with his back all his life. And he said, well, after one session with Ward, and he continued to go to him, he didn't cure him, but it alleviated the problem, the pain that he'd had pretty much all his life. So he was good. He was good at what he did.
Right. And let's see. I mean, you've written all these other books. I'd love to have you back on and talk about it. But somebody asked your knowledge about Hollywood. The question is, it's a little off topic. Any horror stories, personal encounters of Hollywood?
Horror. I mean, if I told you, I'd be in the courts if I told you the truth about all the Hollywood horror stories.
Because you did write a book about Clint Eastwood too, right?
I did. Clint. Yeah. No, he was great. No, I because of, as I said, I'm working in magazines and things. No, I interviewed him many times, and I spent a couple of weeks in Carmel with him when he was running for mayor, which was great fun.
That's great.
And all all of that. And no, I was lucky because in Hollywood when I went there in the 70s, there wasn't as far as Britain was concerned, there wasn't fax machines. There wasn't. I had a telex machine, which maybe nobody remembers, but they chattered away, and you had a long piece of telex paper, which if you broke, you had to be able to fit it together again with a piece of. I used to use the old bits of sellotape. I'm sure it wasn't very technical, but or you had to write another 1,000 words. It was so we used to, and if that broke me down, I used to end up having to go downtown Los Angeles to the Western Union, and the guy never liked to see me because he had to sit there in the middle of the night because of the time difference, filing these masses of things rather than sending $20 to Harry from Auntie Maisie. So, but it was a good time because you'd go to interviews. Angie Dickinson, the guy took me to her home and said, we'll come back in an hour and so on. And she rang him and said, no, we're getting okay. And you're there for the day and you're talking and your interviews. And it all changed much later on when you had to have, I don't know, in the sort of Tom Cruise era of today, you probably got 12 publicists having to sign off on whether you can have an 8x10 black and white picture of them or something. But in those days, John Wayne's, the Kirk Douglases, Gregory Peck's, people like that, they kind of would take your tape recorder from you and walk around with it and speak into it. They didn't have to make an impression. I think
how long were you in Los Angeles for? How long were you in the States?
About 22 years.
22. Oh, so you were here for some time. So
yeah,
you mixed. Yeah. I mean, how many total books have you written? Because was it 8 that I saw on Amazon? Is that correct?
Say again?
Do you recollect how many books you've written? I thought I saw 8 on Amazon.
About 30, I think.
30. Okay, so you don't have all your books on Amazon.
They might not be on .com. I think they're all on .uk.
But that's my mistake. I should have checked the UK. So people can
should be on .com. It's Jeff Bezos is he's trying to save money or something.
So where can people buy the book? Where's the best place to buy it? Do you have a website or is it Amazon?
Amazon's probably the best. So yeah, but it's no, it's out there, and I think it's online too. It's an ebook as well, so it's out there. But the Christine book they reissued too they're kind of like partners in a way too, because they do dovetail with each other. Right. But there's a lot. It's a fascinating era, and the Hustlers book again, because that's the 60s. There's some of the player that was also ongoing at the same time, but that was to do with the underworld, and basically at certain points you had the guy who I always was amused by. He sort of owns Lancashire, which meant he owned the city of Liverpool and most of the thing. A man called David Stirling who owned most of the Scottish Highlands, and they were gambling their estates nightly, playing chemin de fer illegally in these illegal gambling games in Mayfair, in hotels with these with rogues, real rogues, but they were very clever rogues. Right. And I think David Stirling eventually said he lost most of Scotland at the card table. So it was a very fascinating period of history. It's a bit like when I was in Hollywood, I was fascinated by the 30s and the 40s, but the 40s mainly because it seemed so glamorous and so much was happening. And again, in that post-war era, when everything was changing. But of course, the characters then, when you're younger and you're living there, they all seem so much more glamorous and more out of this world than today. I mean, I kind of look at prime ministers and presidents today, and you think, yeah, I'm not, they just are. They don't have that kind of charismatic
panache or something.
Technicolor thing. You don't say, you don't really want to make an appointment to see them. And I always think it's like something like the Eastwood movies. He used to do a movie every 2 or 3 years, and it was an occasion when somebody appeared, when a movie appeared. Like a lot of the older style stars, it was an event, whereas now it's a kind of manufactured event when things happen. But I think it's basically we expect events every 5 minutes in our lives because life's moved to that much higher speed now.
Right. And for people who are interested in reaching out to you, do you have social media, website, or email, or do you have anything you'd like to share about contact information?
I'm at Dougie Thompson on Twitter. Hey, at Dougie, Dougie Thompson with a P.
Great.
At Dougie Thompson on Twitter.
Great. Is there anything you'd like to add, or any projects or books that are coming up? So the best place to get your books, if you're in the UK, is Amazon UK. So I should have checked that. But
yeah.
Anything else that you'd like to add?
Yeah, normally you look out for the Marlon Monroe book next summer. But can't
say that title again.
No, it's a book on Marlon Monroe coming out next summer. But that's you can look forward to that, and a couple of other things. But they're all sort of being written as we speak. So we'll wait and see how they pan out. I think. But the Marlon Monroe one will be. Yeah, I think you probably will want to have me back on for a chat after that one.
I think I'd love to talk with you about Hollywood. If you were in LA for 22 years, I bet you've got some great stories. So I think the audience here really loved listening to you talk about your book. Again, the title of that book is Stephen Ward Scapegoat. They all loved him, but when it went wrong, they killed him. There's tons of information. Mr. Thompson's an excellent writer, gets a lot of details about post-war London that I really enjoyed reading. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us.
No, it's lovely. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Mr. Thompson. Have a great day. End the broadcast.